I kicked down the door. My Christmas surprise turned into a disaster. I wanted to surprise my daughter and arrived without warning, only to find her outside in tens weather, wearing her pajamas, while her husband and his family were opening Christmas presents inside. What happened next made them scream and changed our lives forever. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. The phone rang, a shrill, hostile intrusion that sliced violently through the quiet evening air of my New Jersey study. I slammed my heavy, barely touched tumbler of 15-year-old single malt onto the mahogany side table and reached for the receiver with the practiced grimace of a man who knows a bad call when he hears one. The low gas fire hissed in the hearth, casting anxious, dancing shadows across Sarah's empty leather armchair where I'd been attempting to reread The Maltese Falcon. "Dad, I can't do this anymore." June's voice hit me like a sudden, brutal confession from a witness on the stand. Shattered, choked with the kind of ragged, desperate sobbing I hadn't heard since she was 7. 25 years as a homicide detective, followed by 3 decades of marriage to Sarah, had taught me to hear the silence between the words, the damning gaps that always revealed the truth that speech was intended to obscure. "June, sweetheart, what in God's name is wrong?" The coiled phone cord stretched taut as I propelled myself upright, pacing with restless, predatory energy toward the massive picture window overlooking the cold December night. The wind off the Hudson River rattled the insulated glass like a frustrated fist, and my own reflection stared back. A tired, 65-year-old detective's face, the gray hair disheveled, raw, impotent fury etched deep in the permanent lines around my eyes. He screamed at me for burning the toast. Her whisper came through what sounded like a thick echo chamber. I recognized the acoustics instantly. A locked bathroom, the only place she could hide. I can't breathe, Dad." My grip on the black receiver tightened until my knuckles were stark white, the internal rage I thought I had mastered years ago suddenly roaring back to life. "Slow down, detective," I commanded myself, forcing a calm, even tone for her sake. "Tell me exactly what happened, and I want the details. It was just toast. I was trying to make his mother's special English breakfast the way she likes it, and the stupid imported thing got stuck in the toaster, and when it popped up black instead of the proper golden." June's voice broke completely, fracturing like cheap glass. "He threw the solid Limoges plate across the granite kitchen island, called me useless, said I embarrass him in front of Alistair and Veronica." The glass under my free hand fogged instantly with my burning breath. Outside, the bare, skeletal branches of the ancient oak clawed viciously at the darkening suburban sky like the desperate fingers of the trapped. "Where is that arrogant son of a bitch right now?" My voice was a low growl, barely controlled. "Downstairs with Alistair, in the billiard room, watching some European football match, acting like nothing happened. Veronica keeps making these little, perfect comments about how I clearly need to learn proper household management before she trusts me to host a major charity gala." June's laughter was a terrifying, hollow sound, sharp and bitter. "They're all down there, sipping their Chateauneuf du Pape, and I'm hiding in the bathroom like a terrified child. Dad." I closed my eyes, and instantly I saw her at 7 years old, curled up, hiding the exact same way after a nightmare I could always fix. Back then, I could make everything right with hot chocolate and a story about a brave woman. "Will you come for Christmas? Please, Dad, I need you here." The immediate, protective, utterly furious words I desperately wanted to bellow burned like acid in my throat. "Yes, I'll drive through the night. I'll be there in 6 hours, and I will tear that lawyer's world apart, piece by piece, until he begs for his mother. Instead, I heard the compromised, weaker man I had become whispering the lie. I wish I could, June, but I have that high-stakes, confidential security consulting meeting, the final one, with the state police on the 23rd. If this deal goes through, it's my financial security for the next 10 years. The resulting silence stretched between us, vast and bottomless, immediately filling with all the critical, protective, paternal things I should have said 2 years ago, 6 months ago, or just 3 hours ago. I understand. Dad. Her voice went utterly flat, emotionless, professional, the same detached tone she'd used at Sarah's funeral when the high society friends offered their empty, worthless condolences. You're busy. It's not that simple. It never is. The line went quiet, save for her shallow, quick breathing, the sound of a small animal trapped somewhere in the vast, echoing background of their Connecticut mansion. I heard Alistair's booming, confident laugh rise up from the depths of the billiard room, a sound of absolute, unearned dominion. June, listen to me. After Christmas, when things settle down, maybe we can… I have to go. Dad. He's calling for me. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like an angry, mocking wasp, a sound of absolute, immediate defeat. I stood motionless, the receiver still pressed against my ear, watching the last log in the fireplace crumble into ash. My expensive whiskey sat forgotten on the side table, growing warm and useless. I should cancel absolutely everything. The Vance Security Consulting contract could wait indefinitely. June needed her father, but this specific consulting deal was a once-in-a-decade lifeline. Early retirement from the NYPD Homicide Division had been good to me, but contracts like this were the only thing keeping me afloat in this brutal, high-cost world. Fixed income doesn't stretch the way a daughter's desperation does, especially when every single bill increases each year. I finally hung up the phone, the gentle click sounding like a coffin lid snapping shut. The house suddenly felt deafeningly quiet, suffocating. 3 hours passed. I went through all the motions of a man trying to bank a fire he knew was out. Checked the locks, a detective's habit, banked the fire, brushed my teeth. Now I lay rigid in my bed, staring at the ceiling where the shadows danced and moved like a series of cruel accusations. The digital clock read 10:47 p.m. Sleep felt as distant as the concept of Garrett Blackwood facing a legitimate consequence. I got up, padded in bare, cold feet to the window. The same defeated reflection stared back, but this time I saw something else. Something I couldn't unsee. Cowardice, maybe. Or just the face of a man who'd let his own daughter down when her survival depended on his immediate intervention. 1 year ago, in this exact silent room, June had called with the engagement news, driving up from Boston on a perfect autumn Saturday morning, radiating that particular, blinding glow of new love that had always worried me. She sat on the living room couch where Sarah used to fold laundry, anxiously twisting her grandmother's engagement ring, Sarah's ring, around her finger. "His name's Garrett. Dad," she'd said, her voice a little too high. "Garrett Blackwood. He's 40. He's a corporate litigator for Winston and Blackwood. Dad, I'm so incredibly happy." Even then, something had felt instinctively wrong to the old detective in me. The way she said his name too carefully. The way she kept glancing at her phone, compulsively checking a string of messages. "When do I finally get to interview this Garrett?" I'd asked, the old cop in me unable to use the word meet. "Soon. He's He's exceptionally busy with the firm right now. But you'll love him, Dad. He takes care of everything. He makes all the decisions, so I don't have to worry about anything important. That should have been the first, glaring warning signal I registered. Sarah had never needed anyone to make her decisions. She'd been my partner in every investigation, not my dependent. People don't change that easily, sweetheart, I'd told her, the detective in me trying to offer a professional assessment when she nervously mentioned his intense focus. A marriage reveals character, June. It doesn't magically transform it. You're being incredibly unfair, Dad. He loves me. Her nervous, artificial laughter had filled the room like toxic smoke. She'd spent the next agonizing hour vehemently defending a manipulative lawyer I had yet to meet, desperately making excuses for behaviors she had only vaguely described. Red flags were flapping wildly in a Category 5 hurricane, and I, the retired detective, had deliberately chosen to blind myself to them, prioritizing a false sense of peace over the painful truth. Why hadn't I fought harder? Why hadn't I demanded to meet him before any engagement ring was put on Sarah's finger? Why had I simply nodded politely when she claimed he was too busy to visit a simple house in New Jersey? The clock on the wall now showed 11:23 p.m. I returned to my cold bed, pulling Sarah's favorite woolen quilt up to my chest. She'd painstakingly knitted it the year before the cancer finally took her, her hands still moving with quiet, precise purpose despite the disease that was eating her from the inside out. Sarah would have instantly known what to say to June tonight, would have known how to cut through Garrett's calculated emotional manipulation with the cold, surgical precision of a scalpel. She had never once been afraid to speak a difficult, agonizing truth when someone she loved was in clear and present danger. But Sarah was gone, and I was here, a coward lying wide awake while my brilliant daughter suffered a slow death by 1,000 cuts simply because I was too afraid of making an inconvenient scene, too fundamentally concerned about a lucrative business contract to drive a mere 6 hours and finally be the father, the homicide detective she so desperately needed. The wind outside picked up sudden, brutal intensity, rattling the windows like it was actively trying to break in and expose the scene. Or maybe break me out. Sometimes it was impossible to tell which direction the pressure was flowing. I rolled over, violently pressing my face into the pillow, trying to find a sleep that wouldn't come. The wedding. How could I have ignored the glaring, screaming evidence at the wedding? 11:30 p.m. Still staring at the cold, dark ceiling, but now my analytical mind had fixed completely on that sunny January day 11 months ago, the day I, the seasoned detective, watched my daughter marry a proven emotional predator and did absolutely nothing to stop the inevitable. The Plaza Hotel ballroom was ostentatious. June, in Sarah's grandmother's antique lace dress, altered to fit her smaller, increasingly fragile frame, looked breathtakingly beautiful but terrifyingly delicate, like spun glass that might instantly shatter with the wrong word. I'd sat alone at the massive family table, watching Garrett's entitled relatives utterly dominate the conversation. The guest list had been predictably small, almost entirely his people. June's close friends from her art history program hadn't been invited. Too expensive, she had explained, her voice empty. Garrett thinks we should keep it more intimate. Veronica Blackwood had immediately positioned herself as the absolute, reigning expert on everything, her sharp, society voice cutting through the elegant reception chatter like a newly sharpened buzzsaw. Now, Juniper will certainly need to learn how to be a proper, obedient wife, she had announced to anyone within earshot of the bar. Garrett has extremely specific expectations about household management, perfect social organization, and advanced meal planning. His previous girlfriends simply never quite measured up in that critical department. June had smiled, that tight, brittle, panic-stricken smile she had already begun to perfect. "I'm looking forward to learning, Mother Blackwood," she'd chirped, making the entire sacred institution of marriage sound like a tedious masterclass in perpetually pleasing one demanding man instead of an equal partnership between two adult souls. Alistair Blackwood had been worse. Crude, misogynistic jokes about keeping wives in line delivered with the aggressive confidence of a man who had never, ever been challenged by an equal. Other guests, primarily June's distant cousins, had shifted uncomfortably in their expensive seats, but no one, including me, her father, her protector, said a single word. "Women need to know their exact place," he declared during his insulting toast, looking straight at me. "That's what makes a happy, functional marriage, isn't it, Elijah?" I'd simply lifted my glass, a silent, raging coward. The absolute worst, most damning moment came during the traditional cake cutting. June had laughed brightly as she tried to playfully feed Garrett a small, tiny bite, the expected social script of a wedding. Instead of playing along or smiling, he had instantly grabbed her delicate wrist. Hard. "Careful with the jacket. June, this custom-made brioni costs more than most people earn in a month," he'd hissed, his polished lawyer's smile vanishing entirely. Her beautiful, desperate smile had faltered, just for a horrifying second. But I, the observer, had seen it. That distinct flash of raw, public shame and crushing embarrassment. She had instantly apologized at her own goddamn wedding for nearly getting a tiny, single speck of frosting on his precious, perfect designer jacket. "He's just nervous about the wedding, Dad," she'd whispered to me later when I'd finally managed to ask if everything was truly all right. Even then, only hours into her legal marriage, she was already constructing the excuses for him. I got up again, the raw, cold rage now fully mobilized, pacing over to Sarah's antique jewelry box on the dresser. Her original wedding band still sat in the faded velvet slot, catching the moonlight from the window, a constant, painful accusation. 43 years we had been married. Never once had I grabbed her wrist in public. Never once had she apologized to me for the mere act of existing in my space. The clock read 12:15 a.m. Now, December 19th. June's phone call felt like it had occurred days ago instead of just hours. I thought back to Thanksgiving dinner at their mansion in Greenwich. June serving everything flawlessly, Veronica criticizing the seasoning, Garrett coldly correcting June's story about a successful new gallery acquisition. She'd grown quieter as the evening progressed, physically smaller somehow. Christmas last year, she'd called to explain, her voice tinny and strained, why Garrett couldn't make it back to New Jersey. Work emergency. Always work. A convenient, unchallengeable excuse. Then came the slow, calculated, methodical isolation. Friends who abruptly stopped calling because June was perpetually unavailable. Her successful hobbies abandoned because they inevitably took time away from Garrett's crucial needs, and phone calls that grew progressively shorter and much less frequent. I had watched my vibrant, fiercely independent daughter disappear piece by painful piece, and I had foolishly told myself it was normal, a tough adjustment period. The unavoidable growing pains of marriage, lies, all the convenient, comforting lies I had manufactured for myself because confronting the brutal truth meant instantly confronting my own colossal, systemic failure as a father. Sitting in that grand wedding reception, watching June flinch reflexively at her husband's public, subtle criticism. I'd felt the exact same crushing helplessness that had consumed me during Sarah's final, agonizing days in the hospital. The same sense of being utterly powerless against forces I could neither name nor control. But this was tragically different. Sarah's cancer had been a biological enemy we could at least name and fight together with a shared purpose. Garrett was an insidious poison that worked slowly, relentlessly, psychologically, convincing June that the growing sickness in the marriage was entirely her fault. I had paid for that entire wedding, walked her down that long aisle, and willingly given her away to a polished, handsome predator who saw her as property to be ruthlessly managed rather than a human being to be unconditionally loved. The storm outside was rapidly picking up intensity, tree branches scraping against the siding like the desperate, jagged fingernails of the damned on a chalkboard. Dawn couldn't be far off, but I desperately needed sleep. My mind kept violently circling back to that last phone call, to June's broken, suffocated voice, and to my own pathetic, self-serving response about business contracts and scheduling conflicts. Tomorrow, I will call the state police. I will cancel the meeting. Sleep finally took me mid-thought, a cold, empty thief, but my fragmented dreams were instantly full of elegant wedding bells that sounded exactly like a series of screeching alarm bells, and a terrified daughter who kept endlessly apologizing for unforgivable things that were demonstrably not her fault. This was it. No more planning, no more internal debate, no more second-guessing the consulting contract. Just walk up to that ridiculous, oversized door, ring the bell, and finally see my daughter's face before I lost her entirely. The carefully wrapped gifts, the deep blue scarf, and the biography of the uncompromising architect rustled with a dry, papery sound as I transferred them from the back seat of my SUV to the deep pockets of my heavy wool coat. The biography fit easily in my left inner pocket, but the thick, valuable scarf made my right side bulge noticeably, a suspicious asymmetry that would have instantly given me away to any sharp observer, and I suddenly hated the pretense of surprise. I pulled my collar up, secured the brass button of my coat, and stepped out of the warm truck cab into the bitter, needle-sharp Connecticut morning air. My breath came out in thick, urgent white puffs as I crossed the wide street toward the colonial mansion, the crunch of my boots on the compacted snow sounding impossibly loud in the otherwise pristine, wealthy silence of the Greenwich neighborhood. Somewhere inside that ostentatious house, June was undoubtedly already up, probably serving Christmas breakfast to the Blackwood clan, making sure every detail was impeccably perfect for Garrett and his parents, meticulously making herself physically and emotionally smaller so they could occupy every available cubic inch of space in her life. Not today, I swore to myself, the cold rage of a father finally replacing the fear of inconvenience. Today, someone is coming to forcibly remind June that she matters more than their entire collective legacy. I strode up the cobblestone driveway, the useless gifts heavy in my coat, ready for the rehearsed moment of surprise, and then I saw the figure by the massive, sculpted snowbank. The figure wasn't moving, a small, terrifyingly still huddle hunched against the unforgiving white mound of snow, knees drawn up tight to the chest, arms wrapped pathetically around itself. My experienced mind, the one trained by decades of processing crime scenes, needed a harrowing 3 seconds to register what my paternal heart instantly denied. June, my daughter, sitting entirely alone in the snow, wearing only a thin, silk Christmas pajama set. The wrapped gifts immediately slipped from my numb fingers, scattering across the frozen driveway like a series of discarded, futile prayers. I broke into an immediate, flat-out run, my bad knee screaming a sharp, familiar protest with every desperate stride, every violent step bringing the impossible, the unforgivable into sickening, sharp focus. Her lips were a terrifying, mottled purple. Frost had crystallized visibly in her fine, brown hair. She was shivering so violently that her teeth chattered like a grim line of rattling, separate bones. "June!" The word ripped itself from my throat, raw and utterly uncontained. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" She looked up, her blue eyes that had once sparkled with Sarah's own fierce intelligence, now clouded with confusion, dulled by the near-lethal cold, and something far deeper, something irrevocably broken. "Dad." Her voice came out slurred, painfully hypothermic. How are you here? I thought you had that meeting with the state police." I stripped off my own heavy, expensive winter coat without thought, instantly wrapping the vast warmth around her small, freezing frame. She felt like a block of ice even through the thin silk fabric of her pajamas. How long had she been out here in 10-degree weather? In pajamas? "Never mind the meeting," I bit out, hauling her body up. "We need to get you warm, right now." I tried to help her stand, but her legs instantly buckled, unable to support her own weight. "Can you feel your fingers?" She stared blankly at her hands like they belonged to an unfortunate stranger. "Not really. Everything's fuzzy." I half-carried, half-dragged her to my truck, yanking open the passenger door with a frantic violence. The engine had been thankfully running this whole time, the heater blasting warm, artificial air rushing out like a sudden, desperate salvation. I settled her gently into the seat, immediately cranked the heat to maximum blast, and found the heavy emergency blanket I kept permanently secured behind the driver's seat. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered, her fragile defenses finally collapsing. Tears started streaming down her cheeks, leaving temporary, warm tracks on her frozen skin. "I made such a mess of everything. I ruined it." "You have absolutely nothing to apologize for. June?" "Nothing." My voice was a low, concentrated thunder. I began rubbing her small hands aggressively between mine, trying to physically force the sluggish circulation back into her white, immobile fingers. "Tell me exactly what happened." Through the condensation-streaked windshield, I could clearly see the house. Christmas lights twinkling with an obscene merriment, a warm, inviting yellow glow spilling from every single window. The distant, muffled sounds of laughter and celebration drifted mockingly across the frozen lawn. They were inside, happily enjoying Christmas morning, exchanging luxury gifts, while my daughter was left to nearly freeze to death outside their door. "It was an accident," she whispered, her words slowly coming clearer as the intense heat began to return feeling to her abused body. "I was bringing a tray of coffee to everyone during present time. There was wrapping paper everywhere, and I tripped." Her voice broke again, then continued, fueled by the rising temperature. "The coffee went all over Veronica's grandmother's Persian rug. This beautiful, priceless antique rug that has been in their prominent family for 3 generations. Garrett started immediately screaming about how I ruin everything I touch, how I'm congenitally clumsy and unfit to host a Blackwood Christmas. I kept rubbing her hands, but the raw, lethal rage was now building uncontrollably in my chest, like an actual steam pressure overload in a faulty boiler. Decades of detective work had taught me to instantly recognize when a system, be it mechanical or domestic, was approaching dangerous, murderous levels of failure. Veronica said they had been far too lenient with me, that I desperately needed to learn consequences for valuable assets. Alistair immediately agreed, stating loudly that women need discipline to maintain order. He even said that's how his generation kept their high society marriages so strong. June's breathing was finally evening out, a faint, welcome color slowly returning to her frozen cheeks. And then what happened? My voice was dangerously soft. Garrett told me to go outside and think about being more careful. In my pajamas, he said I could come back in when I had sufficiently learned my lesson about respecting the value of their property. The pieces of the case clicked into place with the sickening, mechanical precision of a shotgun chambering a round. The locked door, the extreme hypothermic state, the intentional psychological and physical torture. 4 hours in, deadly, killing cold. They locked you out, I stated, not asked. She nodded, fresh, agonized tears starting anew. I tried knocking after maybe an hour, but Veronica called through the door that I was disturbing their sacred Christmas morning, that I had already done enough damage by staining the rug. Through the passenger window, I could clearly see them in the large, ornate living room, passing sleek, perfectly wrapped presents around a pristine circle, laughing and toasting with crystal champagne glasses, utterly unconcerned, as if they hadn't just left my only daughter to slowly freeze to death over spilled coffee. As the intense warmth finally returned to her fingers and toes, June looked up at me, her eyes filled with a fresh, terrible cocktail of pain and self-loathing. "Dad, I need to tell you what really happened this morning." June's hands were finally warm in mine, the circulation returning with a sharp, painful tingling. She flexed her fingers experimentally, wincing as full feeling returned to the deadened tissue. "Start from the beginning, June," I said quietly, the former detective in me demanding a full, unvarnished statement. "What time did this entire thing start?" "Around 8:30 a.m. Everyone was in the living room opening gifts. I just wanted to be helpful, so I brought a tray of fresh coffee from the kitchen." Her voice steadied noticeably as the deep, penetrating warmth spread through her body. There was beautiful wrapping paper scattered absolutely everywhere, silver and gold, like a fairy tale. I should have been more careful with my footing. I kept my voice perfectly level, not feeding her self-blame. "What happened when you tripped?" "The coffee went everywhere, all over their Persian rug, this gorgeous antique that belonged to Veronica's grandmother, hand-woven, worth thousands of dollars. It was an accident, but Garrett started screaming that I ruin everything I touch, that I'm a menace to valuable assets. She was making excuses for them already. The destructive, self-abusive pattern was so deeply ingrained she couldn't stop. My grip tightened dangerously on the steering wheel. "Over an accident." But it was such an expensive rug. Dad. It had history. I tried desperately to clean it up, but Veronica said I was only making the stain worse. She kept saying how they'd been too patient with me, how I needed to be taught some responsibility. Alistair backed her up, said women in his day knew how to be far more careful around nice, irreplaceable things. June's words came faster now, like a psychological dam finally bursting under the pressure of the heat and the truth. Through the truck's windshield, the faint, mocking sound of Christmas music drifted from the house. Jingle bells played while my daughter recounted the story of being left to almost die. Then Garrett said, "Go outside and think about being more careful." Just like that. No coat, no gloves, in 10-degree weather. And then they locked the door behind you. June nodded, burning shame instantly coloring her restored cheeks. "I knocked after about an hour. My feet were so cold they were burning. But Veronica called through the door that I was disturbing their Christmas celebration. that I had already ruined enough of their perfect morning. 4 hours. Dad. I was outside for 4 hours in deadly cold while they exchanged gifts and drank champagne. I kept thinking someone, anyone, would come to check on me. That surely Garrett would realize it was too cold, too dangerous. Her voice cracked, finally raw with the grief of her abandonment. But the longer I waited, the more I finally understood that this was my calculated punishment for being clumsy, for not being good enough to be a Blackwood wife. June, listen to me. I turned to face her fully, the detective finally taking over from the father. No one deserves this. You understand that, right? No one on this earth deserves this. But I did mess up their expensive rug. It was my fault. Stop. The word came out harder and sharper than I intended. An abrupt, necessary physical shock. That rug is an object. It is not worth one single minute of your life. Not one single second. She stared at me, her face pale, as if I had just spoken an ancient, foreign language. The utterly revolutionary idea that her life, her physical safety, her human dignity mattered more than a priceless Persian heirloom was an alien concept after 11 months of psychological warfare. They said I need to learn to be more careful around nice things, that I don't contribute financially to the family, so I shouldn't destroy what they've earned. Every polished, corporate word she repeated was another nail hammered into Garrett's self-dug coffin. Financial control, emotional manipulation, deliberate physical endangerment leading to potential homicide. The pattern was crystal clear to anyone with the training to see it. I started getting really cold after the second hour. Couldn't feel my hands anymore. But I thought if I went back inside before learning my lesson, it would just make things exponentially worse later. So she had chosen near hypothermia over their structured, predictable anger, chosen potential death over disappointing them further. The depth of the psychological control they had achieved over her was breathtaking in its cold, calculated cruelty. When you couldn't feel your hands, June, that's when frostbite starts. You could have lost fingers, lost toes. You could have died. I know that now. Fresh tears started, but these felt different, cleansing. When I saw you walking up the driveway, I thought I was hallucinating. Dad showing up like some kind of unbelievable Christmas miracle. No miracle, June. Just a father who finally arrived in time to see the truth he should have recognized, arrested, and stopped months ago. Through the passenger window, I watched them in the living room, still laughing, still passing presents, utterly oblivious, like they hadn't just intentionally left my daughter to freeze to death 10 feet from their oblivious, warm front door. I looked through that window at their perfect, high society Christmas scene and felt something snap completely inside me, the final, stressed cable of my patience giving way. 40 years of measured, methodical engineering and detective responses disappeared in an instant, replaced by a pure, predatory, protective instinct. Stay in the truck, June. Keep the heater on. Keep warm. Dad, please, please don't make it worse. I have to live with them. I turned back to her, my daughter wrapped in my coat like a refugee from her own life. No, June, you don't. Not anymore. The short, furious walk back toward their pristine, expensive front door felt like approaching a demolition site, each deliberate step heavy and measured. The cheerful Christmas wreath mocked me with its perfectly tied red velvet bow, while I could still hear the faint, residual echoes of June's violent teeth-chattering ringing in my ears. I tried the handle first. Locked, just like she had said. My heavy, deliberate knock cut through the house's incessant Christmas music. Footsteps approached, and the door opened to reveal Garrett, a champagne flute in his perfectly manicured hand, his lawyer's face shifting instantly from surprise to calculated, professional charm. "Mr. Vance, what an unexpected, wonderful surprise. June didn't mention you were coming to Greenwich for Christmas." She couldn't mention it. "Garrett, you locked her outside." His practiced smile faltered, just for a moment, the underlying panic visible in the quick flicker of his eyes. "I think there's been a slight misunderstanding. Eli." June needed some fresh air to calm down after her little accident with the heirloom. "In 10-degree weather? In thin silk pajamas? For 4 hours? Garrett? Well, sometimes lessons need to be memorable, to properly instill the value of assets," he finished, trying desperately to recapture the ground he'd lost. The custom-made mahogany doorframe splintered violently under the heel of my thick boot. Wood cracked like a gunshot as the door slammed backward against the inside wall. Christmas ornaments on the nearby tree rattled precariously. A sudden, cold, absolute silence fell over the entire living room like a heavy, velvet curtain dropping in the middle of a bad play. Veronica looked up first from her seat by the roaring fireplace, Alistair from his expensive leather armchair, their crystal champagne glasses frozen halfway to their hypocritical lips. I filled their pristine doorway. A towering, enraged Judgment Day arrived early, snow still clinging to my shoulders. "How dare you intentionally put my daughter outside in weather that could have killed her?" Veronica recovered first, her voice instantly taking on that high-pitched, patronizing tone I remembered so clearly from the wedding reception. "Elijah, you simply do not understand the gravity of the situation." June spilled coffee on my grandmother's Persian rug, a priceless, irreplaceable family heirloom. "And that crime justifies the deliberate risk of her life, you manipulative woman." Alistair set down his champagne with deliberate, condescending calm. "You're wildly overreacting, old man." June needed to learn responsibility. That is how a successful, high-society marriage operates. Marriage? I stepped fully into their warm, luxurious living room, a chilling force of retribution. "You call this homicide attempt marriage? You deliberately left her to freeze to death over spilled coffee." Garrett moved instantly to physically block my path, trying desperately to reclaim his lost authority in his own home. "This is our house, Eli, and June is my wife. You have no legal right to burst in here and breach the peace. And I have every fundamental right. She is my daughter, and you nearly murdered her with your cruel, calculated negligence." The perfectly lit Christmas tree twinkled innocently behind them, hundreds of expensive gifts scattered beneath, stark evidence of their comfortable, self-satisfied cruelty. They had been celebrating their inherited wealth, while June turned blue with cold, a mere 10 feet from their door. Veronica tried again, her voice rising with desperate, shrill indignation. "We were teaching her to be more careful with valuable things. You were teaching her to fear you. There is a difference between discipline and domestic terrorism." "Well, marriage requires discipline," Alistair insisted, his feeble authority finally crumbling as I towered physically over his chair. "Marriage requires love, something you people wouldn't recognize if it kicked down your front door, which I just did." That was the precise moment June appeared in the archway behind me, still small, still fragile, but still standing, wrapped in my coat. Her physical presence was the undeniable, final piece of evidence in this spontaneous case against them. Her frost-bitten fingers, her terrifying, temporary hypothermic confusion, her small, abused body telling the damning story their self-serving, lawyerly words tried desperately to deny. Garrett's polished, practiced mask slipped completely, revealing the raw panic beneath. June, tell your father you're fine. This is family business, and he is dangerously interfering. June looked at her husband with new, utterly clear eyes that had been nearly frozen shut outside his door. I couldn't feel my fingers. Garrett, I truly thought I might die from the cold. Veronica's voice cracked with a last-ditch, desperate need for control. You are being melodramatic. June, you could have knocked louder if you were really in trouble. She tried. Veronica, and you told her she was disturbing your perfect Christmas. I looked around the room at their shocked, panicked faces, then back at June, shivering faintly in my coat. The talking was finished. June, show me where your important things are. We're leaving now. The words cut through their stunned, terrified silence like a detective's final order. No discussion, no negotiation, no chance for parole. The uncompromising mindset that had pursued murderers and kept my own trains running on time for 40 years was now taking full, absolute control. June moved toward the grand staircase, still wrapped in my coat, her steps miraculously steadier now that warmth had returned to her compromised limbs. I followed, leaving the Blackwood family scattered around their perfect Christmas morning, stunned, motionless, like debris after a massive, high-speed derailment. You can't just legally take my wife. Garrett's voice finally cracked with genuine desperation as he scrambled up, following us to the stairs. This is kidnapping. Eli! I'm calling the police. I turned slowly on the stairs, looked down at him with the exact same expression I'd used on rookie conductors who thought they could successfully argue with the immutable laws of physics and engineering. She's my daughter first, Garrett, and you forfeited your legal rights to her when you nearly killed her. You want to call the police? Be my guest. I'll simply tell them you locked her out in a blizzard over a coffee stain. See which charge they pursue first. June's bedroom was small, almost painfully sparse, tucked under the eaves like an expensive, corporate afterthought. Her few personal belongings looked utterly lost among the expensive, impersonal furniture Garrett's family had clearly chosen. A small, familiar childhood teddy bear sat innocently on the massive mahogany dresser next to dozens of bottles of outrageously expensive French perfume. The brutal contrast told the entire story of her life here. Just the important things, June, I said, pulling her battered college duffel bag from the back of the walk-in closet. We can and will replace absolutely everything else. You will not need anything they bought for you. Her hands moved with a growing, cold certainty as she selected only what truly mattered. Faded photographs of Sarah, her laptop with resume files and gallery portfolios, the few pieces of simple jewelry that had been gifts from me, not them. Her fingers paused briefly over her beautiful, sparkling diamond wedding ring. Then, with a deliberate, empowering defiance, she left it on the dresser, shining uselessly in the morning sun. Veronica appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with a final, desperate attempt at matriarchal authority. June, dear, think about your solemn marriage vows. You promised before God and society to stay through good times and bad. June looked up from folding her own forgotten winter coat, the one that had been hanging uselessly in the closet while she froze outside. I promised to love and cherish. Veronica, I did not promise to freeze to death over spilled coffee. Heavy footsteps thundered up the wooden stairs. Alistair and Garrett crowded immediately behind Veronica, 3 adults trying actively to intimidate one young, frost-bitten woman into staying in their carefully constructed prison. You're making a huge mistake, old man, Alistair wheezed, his face red with impotent rage. We know people. Powerful people. Important people. I zipped June's bag shut with a defiant, loud zip and slung the surprisingly heavy weight over my shoulder. Your important people weren't here this morning when June needed them. Alistair. I was. We moved toward the stairs, the entire Blackwood family backing away from us like they were facing something truly, fundamentally dangerous. Maybe they were. Maybe a father's protective, justified rage was a force more dangerous than they had calculated when they chose cruelty over basic human compassion. In the living room below, their elaborate Christmas celebration sat abandoned, expensive gifts scattered carelessly beneath the tree, champagne glasses half empty, the priceless Persian rug still showing the undeniable, dark coffee stains that had nearly cost my daughter her life. Garrett made one last, frantic, pathetic play at the front door. June, you absolutely can't leave me. We can work this out. I love you. June paused, wrapped in my oversized coat, and looked back at the man who had ordered her outside to freeze, her face cold, calm, and utterly resolved. Love doesn't leave people to die in the snow, Garrett. The broken doorframe testified silently to the awful truth of that morning. I had violently kicked it down to reach her, and now we were calmly walking through it, together, toward a necessary freedom. Outside, several curious neighbors peered from their windows, drawn by the loud commotion. The Blackwood family's perfect facade was crumbling publicly, their carefully hidden cruelty exposed for the entire exclusive street to witness. Garrett followed us all the way to the truck, his hands slapping uselessly against the cold hood as I loaded June's small bag. This is theft. I'm calling the police. She's my wife. God damn it. I walked around to face him, using every remaining inch of my height and the unwavering authority earned from 40 years of honest, dangerous work. Step away from my truck. Step away from my daughter. You will not pursue this, Garrett. If you ever attempt to contact her again, directly or indirectly, you will answer to me, the man who spent 40 years putting people like you in the morgue or behind bars. And next time, Garrett, I won't just kick down a door. He finally stepped back, the cowardice I had seen at the wedding reception finally replacing his thin pretense of authority. June settled into the passenger seat, pulling my coat tighter around herself, her head leaning heavily against the headrest. The truck's heater blasted warm, comforting air, finally chasing away the last, clinging remnant of the morning's deadly cold. In the rearview mirror, I could see them standing motionless in their pristine driveway, diminished, utterly powerless, watching justice drive away. As we pulled onto the main road, June finally looked back at the house, which was growing quickly smaller and smaller in the side mirror. The first 10 miles passed in absolute silence. June stared out the passenger window at the wealthy suburban Massachusetts landscape rolling past, her mind finally beginning to process the magnitude of what had just happened. I kept the heater running full blast, checking her color in the rearview mirror every few minutes, a father's constant, silent surveillance. Finally, she spoke, her voice thin but present. Dad, what if I made a mistake? What if they were right about me being fundamentally careless? I had been waiting for this exact, necessary moment, the victim's first, inevitable attempt at self-blame. Sweetheart, spilling coffee does not justify leaving a human being to freeze to death. Not ever. Not for any reason. Their actions were calculated, intentional, and potentially lethal. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was finally wearing off. But what if Garrett comes after me? What if he tries to force me back? He won't get within a mile of our house. June. I guarantee it. I'll have a temporary restraining order filed before the new year, and I still have enough police contacts to make sure that order is strictly enforced. By the time we reached the cold Connecticut border, June was finally starting to talk about practical things. Where she would sleep, how long she could stay in New Jersey, whether she still had her skills after months of having every major decision made for her. "Your old room is exactly like you left it, June," I told her, my voice low and reassuring. "And we'll get you set up with your own bank account and your own therapist first thing. If we need a permanent injunction, we'll get it. Whatever it takes." We stopped for gas and coffee near Hartford. June pulled my coat tight around her pajamas, still visibly self-conscious, but the truck driver filling up next to us simply smiled and tipped his cap. "Y'all heading home for Christmas?" "Taking my daughter home where she absolutely belongs," I said, my chest tight with sudden, raw emotion. June managed a small, genuine smile, the first real one I'd seen in months. "Dad surprised me with a visit," she told the stranger. It was the very first time I'd heard her interact normally with a stranger in months. Not apologizing, not shrinking away, just talking like a regular, competent person who deserved to be heard. Back on the highway, she found Sarah's old photo in the glove compartment, the one I'd carried for luck during my railroad days when the jobs were dirty, dangerous, and coming home alive wasn't guaranteed. She would have come, too, wouldn't she? If she'd been alive? Your mother would have arrived with a baseball bat and half the church ladies as backup. She never did like bullies, June. The shared memory made us both smile, a quiet acknowledgement of the fierce woman who was still fighting for us. "I don't know how to thank you for saving me, Dad." "You don't need to thank me, June. That's what fathers and former detectives do." The dark Pennsylvania mountains appeared suddenly on the horizon as the December sun started its early descent. June was sitting straighter now, the healthy color fully back in her cheeks, her voice stronger and more resonant with every single mile that took her farther from that cold, suffocating house. "I used to be really good at marketing," she said suddenly, an unrelated thought bubbling up from her recovered memory. "Before I met Garrett, I had ideas, gallery campaigns that worked and sold out. You'll have them again, June. Better ones, probably. You've learned things about people, about coercive control and manipulation, that most marketers never truly figure out." "Like what?" "Like how to immediately recognize when someone's trying to diminish and control you. That is invaluable knowledge in both business and in life." She was quiet for another hour, watching the familiar New Jersey countryside roll past, the landscape of her childhood returning to her. "Do you really think I can actually do this, Dad? Live on my own, make my own decisions? June, you survived being married to Garrett Blackwood for 11 months. After that, honey, anything else in life will feel like a long, peaceful vacation." For the first time all day, she truly laughed, a deep, full, unburdened laugh, the kind of liberating sound Sarah's daughter was always supposed to make. As we pulled into Greenwood, past the small, familiar gas station where I'd bought supplies for the trip, past the diner where Sarah and I had shared our first date 45 years ago, June pressed her forehead to the cold window like a child seeing Christmas lights. "Everything looks exactly the same," she whispered, amazed. But we both knew, profoundly, that wasn't quite true. The town looked the same. The house would look the same. But June was fundamentally different now. She had deliberately walked through fire and come out on the other side, finally holding her own brave hand. As we finally pulled into our own driveway, June looked at the familiar house where she had grown up, where she had been safe. "It looks exactly the same," she whispered, tears of relief now mixing with the joy. But I feel completely, absolutely different. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.